Welcome to the deep dive. You're probably here because, you want to understand some complex ideas, but without wading through loads of dense text, you're looking for those aha moments, right, where things just click. Well, today we're diving into a really fascinating kind of intricate framework. It's called Ikolalysis, or sometimes life mathematics, and it has some pretty unique views on things like energy and consciousness. So think of this as your shortcut to getting a handle on some really novel concepts. Let's dive in.
Great. Yeah, it's definitely novel. The place to start is probably their view on energy. It's quite foundational. They define it as potential with infinitely exponential frequency of seeming nothingness and stillness.
Okay, hold on. Potential. Infinitely exponential frequency, seeming nothingness. Let's unpack that a bit. P times F infinity, right?
So energy, PFF. Think of P as, well, potential, like a coiled spring. And the FF, that infinitely exponential frequency, imagine that spring vibrating incredibly fast. So fast, it almost looks still.
Ah, okay, so it looks still, but there's immense activity underneath.
Precisely. It's this idea that even apparent emptiness has this huge potential vibrating away, holding power. And then this energy, it's sort of diffracts and refracts through what they call recursive time oscillation.
Recursive time oscillation, meaning it changes through time in cycles.
Yeah, kind of like ripples spreading out and interacting over time.
Okay. And that leads into pre-existential energy. The formula looks similar. P-A-F, yeah, F, yeah. We've got the P and the F infinity again. But what's T? Time inertia.
Right, time inertia, T0. It's described as a state where space and our usual perception are basically void, or where everything is purely incorporeal, non-physical.
So pre-existential energy is this fundamental potential and frequency, but existing before time as we know it kicks in, before physical reality.
That seems to be the idea, before it gets activated into the tangible world.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift to consciousness then. The source makes a distinction, right, between life and living.
It does. It's a key distinction. Life, in this context, is about the extent to which palpable things we can sense affect an entity. It's the initial action or reaction.
Like a plant turning to the sun.
Exactly. That's life.
Yeah.
But living, that involves more. It's about acquired experiences, adapting, even influencing those experiences.
So learning from experience, shaping things.
Yeah. Learning, adapting, interacting more consciously. Like an animal figuring out where food is based on past experience.
Okay, that makes sense. Basic reaction versus active adaptation. And then this idea that existence is patterned on consciousness. How do they define consciousness itself?
Consciousness is defined as the clarity of wave patterns and directions of latent, palpable, and observable occurrences.
Clarity of wave patterns. So how clear and directed events are.
Basically, yes.
Oh.
How distinct these different types of happenings are. And this leads to the idea that, well, everything is statically conscious.
Everything. Even like a rock.
In a sense, it suggests everything has a relative level of consciousness, an inherent pattern or organization. It's not saying a rock thinks, but that its structure itself represents a basic level of information, a rudimentary awareness within this framework.
Wow, okay. That's a different way to look at it. But then there's this other concept, omniscient consciousness as a blank page, seeming nothingness and stillness. That sounds like the opposite.
It does seem paradoxical, yeah. But the idea might be that absolute total awareness wouldn't have the specific distinctions and separations that create our individual experience. It's like pure potential, undifferentiated.
Ah, so no specific viewpoint.
Kind of. Our human sense of existence, the text suggests, comes from the quantization of consciousness.
Quantization, like breaking it down into individual points.
Exactly. It's like the universe focusing this broad awareness into specific points of experience. Us. And this triggers our distinct perceptions.
And this is to prevent existential absurdism. What does that mean here?
Well, imagine if everything was just a blur, right? No distinct things, no meaning, no identity, just an undifferentiated wash. That might be the absurdism. Quantization gives us the pixels to see the picture.
I see. So we're not trying to become conscious because, in a way, everything already is.
According to this, yes. We're trying to navigate the overwhelming fog of consciousness, as they put it, to understand it enough to exercise our will and connect the dots between the things we experience.
Okay, that's some heavy foundational stuff. Energy, consciousness, quantization. Now let's get into Ikolalysis itself, or life mathematics. What is it, fundamentally?
At its core, Ikolalysis is presented as the knowledge of palpably incorporeal structure of existence. It looks at the correlation between that incorporeal structure and the physical world and how they both change over time, their temporal dynamics.
The incorporeal structure, like the hidden patterns underneath.
Yeah, the non-physical framework. And it's positioned quite boldly, actually, as the frame of science.
The frame of science. So it includes regular science but goes beyond it.
That seems to be the claim. It encompasses science, but also knowledge that might fall outside science's current methods or scope.
Okay. And life mathematics, is that the practical side, the how-to?
Exactly. Life mathematics is described as the analysis and synthesis of pretty much anything that hits our senses, physical or non-physical. The goal is to pull out the numeric roots of actions, reactions, responses, and then use those roots to create formulas, recursive ones, for managing physical activities.
Numeric roots. So trying to find the math behind everything we experience.
That's the essence of it, yeah.
And the applications mentioned are huge, measuring human potential, influence, emotions, success, even restructuring societies and economies. That's ambitious.
Extremely ambitious, yes. The idea is that by understanding these underlying patterns, you could quantify these complex aspects of human life and society and maybe even guide them.
How would you measure progress in Ikolalysis then?
Progress is measured by how well you can quantify the changes in perception. Changes triggered by interactions, by someone's position, by time passing, and then deriving equations to manage those effects.
So it's about measuring perception shifts and finding the math for them.
Right. Its primary use, according to the text, is studying these incorporeal forms, these non-physical patterns, and understanding how physical reality is patterned on them.
And it's also used for telling apart things that look similar and measuring group dynamics.
Yes, differentiating entities and measuring perceptions and interactions, both individual and group.
And then there's this technique, subconscious induction technique for peaceful reform. Tell me about that.
Okay, yeah, this one's interesting. It's proposed as a way to bring about change without direct confrontation. The idea is you identify a dominant, maybe outdated subconscious influence in a society. They call it a vehicular subliminal effect.
Like a deeply ingrained belief or habit.
Could be, yeah. Then you introduce a new idea, a new innovation that's designed to be proportionally more influential, more appealing. This new influence gradually attenuates or weakens the old one. It subtly shifts perspectives and behaviors at a subconscious level.
So you gently replace an old influence with a stronger, newer one, leading to change without people really fighting it.
That's the theory. A kind of subtle, peaceful redirection for social, political, or economic change.
Okay. Let's move to the human body itself, as seen through this lens. Inner energy, physical form.
Right. The inner energy is described almost like a biological radio, a spiritus nanocrypto transceiver, sending and receiving signals latently, subconsciously.
A spiritus nanocrypto transceiver.
Yeah.
And our physical body.
The body, the material form, is seen as a composite, built from fundamental literati particles that cluster into a projecting frame.
The projecting frame being our physical body.
Yes, our body. And it acts as a shield for that inner energy, but also as another transceiver and a transducer.
Transducer, meaning it converts signals.
Yeah, converting signals from the inner energy from other people, from the environment, into electrical impulses that our brain interprets as, our characteristics, our experiences.
And then we get these terms, scheme post and trait tempo. What are they about?
Scheme post seems to refer to elements within us that are absorbable, that modulate us, and define our potential and our sort of baseline energy level potential and kinetic average.
Okay. And trait tempo.
That's described as our composite temperament, our typical way of being. And it's susceptible to modulation by something called a trait extensor.
Trait extensor. That sounds like something external influencing our temperament. And there's a formula here, too.
There is. Body plus form plus M-ring constant. XY percept fame.
All right. Body plus form. Okay. What's the M-ring constant and XY percept fame?
The M-ring, or E-ring constant, apparently defines the parameters of how observers relate to you, the receptor. It limits their influence on you.
So it quantifies your personal power of influence.
Seems like it, yeah. And the XY percept fame likely points to how you perceive your characteristics, your reputation, your level of renown that results from this whole equation.
Got it. And the trait extensor that influences trait tempo. You said it's intrusive, spontaneous. What types are there?
4 main types are listed. Filter, which is associated with name, designation, ambience, and that M-ring constant again.
Filter name. How does that work?
The filter, linked to name, supposedly modulates your basic disposition by dilating, contrasting, or blocking incoming signals or impulses. It sets your primary attributes.
Okay. And designation.
Designation is like an adaptation that tunes the filter. It configures your swing attribute, kind of like a dual personality aspect, which acts as a pivot for your potential and kinetic energy levels.
Swing attribute. Interesting. What about ambience?
Ambience is described as an external, almost illusory atmosphere around you that can either resonate with and boost or impair specific characteristics.
It's like the vibe of a place affecting you.
Kind of, yeah. And we already covered the Emmering constant, defining observer relations and influence.
It really paints a picture of us as these complex systems interacting with layers of subtle influence. What about post-evolution and trait mechanism? It talks about reflex dilation.
Yeah, this concept suggests there's a constant, low-level, spontaneous adjustment happening within us, a reflex dilation. It's driven by the mismatch between the universe's overall processing rate and our individual rate.
A difference in processing speed.
Seems so. And this difference exerts a static influence, a constant subtle pressure that shapes our activities, patterns our body's functions, and can even activate dormant parts of our inner energy.
And this process creates residuum signals.
Right, these ongoing dilations and transmissions create these residuum signals. They're like the faint echoes or traces of this activity. And these signals form the very root of our palpable perceptions, the things we consciously notice, and they trigger our reflexes.
So our conscious awareness picks up on these subtle background signals.
And how susceptible we are to them, how we interpret them, that patterns our behavior.
Okay, that's a lot about the body and its interaction with these forces. Now, this next part sounds really wild. L-modo quantum, psyche-meter frame. It seems to get into where thoughts come from.
It really does. It proposes something quite radical, that our distinct thoughts, our individual mind stream, aren't solely generated inside our heads.
Not generated in the brain. Where then?
It suggests they arise from correlative residuum signals related to those signals we just discussed, but transmitted at high frequency from an external web of bodies.
Web of bodies, like other people. Or something else.
The text mentors incorporeal spirits, so it could imply non-physical entities or maybe a kind of collective consciousness field. These signals are broadcast into space constantly.
Constantly broadcast.
Until they're interpreted by a susceptible body. Someone whose predetermined variables and position make them receptive to that particular signal.
So, thoughts are being received, not just created. That is radical.
It definitely challenges the standard view. And tied to this, life gets another definition here.
Right. It's now the extent of observable possibilities affecting the senses, determined by this L-modo quantum.
Exactly. The L-modo quantum is described as the psyche meter and perception frame. It basically sets the parameters for your potential, your success, fame, even failure. It defines the scope of possibilities you can perceive and interact with.
The frame for your perception and potential. And this leads to psyche engineering, programming the mind.
Yeah, the idea is you could potentially program the incorporeal structure, the abstract aspects, the mind, for directional cognitive evolution.
How?
Either by influencing this structure right at conception or by modulating an infant through dilation or attenuation based on the influencing ambience and their specific L-modo quantum setup.
Wow, shaping minds from the start. Let's break down the mechanics of L-modo quantum. Receptor, mood, percept frame.
Okay, the receptor is the underlying I-quanta. Think of it as a fundamental changeable point defining an entity's core attributes. It's described as alterably recessive.
Alterably recessive.
Okay.
And mood.
Mood represents alterations on that receptor, dilating, defining, attenuating. These shifts frame the entity's current state and position.
So mood is the temporary state of the receptor.
Seems like it. And the percept frame is like a filter that modulates the mood quanta through osmosis. It defines the persona and sets those potential and influence parameters.
Okay, receptor, mood, percept frame, defining potential. Now, these position adaptation types, hyper, comparative, modest, static, they sound like states of being within this system.
They are. They describe how an entity relates to its ambience and its own L-modo quantum strength.
So hyperadaptation, strong L-modo quantum, harmonious ambience.
Right. That indicates high potential, favor, adoration, popularity, things tend to go well.
Comparative adaptation, harmony again, but weaker L-modo quantum.
Yeah. Still influential, definitely, but they need to strive more because the inherent potential is lower.
Makes sense. Modest adaptation, disharmony, but stronger L-modo quantum.
That's high potential. That doesn't always translate outwards. Low power of influence, maybe achievements get overlooked or detracted from. General popularity depends on time.
And finally, static adaptation, disharmony and weaker L-modo quantum.
That's like the toughest spot. Uneasy striving, low potential, low influence, possibly facing disdain even with good ideas.
And these adaptations have formulas with E, Z quantum, K spectra. What's the significance there?
Easy to be place or environment. Z quantum is an identifier we'll probably get to. The function K spectra, area K spectra, the inner, or not in K spectra.
Yeah.
It looks like it indicates whether the entity's core function aligns with certain beneficial spectra or ranges defined within this system. Alignment means higher potential influence.
And the prime percept frame codes, C8, D8, B7, D4.
Those likely represent specific configurations of that percept frame filter, characteristic of each adaptation type.
Got it. Then there's temporal dynamics. It says we don't function at optimum simultaneously. Why is that important?
It's crucial because it adds the time element. It means even someone in hyperadaptation isn't influential all the time. Influence ebbs and flows based on time and circumstance. It allows even someone in static adaptation to have moments of influence.
So everything fluctuates, which leads to this entity influence gravity parameter.
Right. Your gravity or influence level depends on your position, your harmony with other variables, and critically time.
And it suggests weaker entities gravitate towards stronger ones.
Yes, there's a tendency described for entities with weaker attraction, those whose function is not in the key K spectra, to be drawn towards those with stronger attraction, whose function is in those spectra.
And we get a society influence formula based on this, E plus O plus 6, and Chi spectra 2, 3, 4, 8.
Yeah, that formula attempts to quantify influence within a group based on place, E, the Z quantum identifier, and alignment with those key K spectra numbers, 2, 3, 4, 8 for humans.
Z quantum incorporates inclination and designation plus 6. We'll need to unpack that. And there's also a formula for high-level potential using Z quantum.
Yes, O plus 4. Life potential, 2, 5, 6, or 7. Again, relating the Z quantum to specific beneficial numbers in a different scale, life potential.
Okay, this system is definitely layered. Let's shift focus now. How is Ikolalysis research actually done? What methods do they use?
It involves a mix of things. Observation, watching actions, reactions, responses. Analytical comparison, looking at similarities and differences. Measuring secondary impacts, how susceptible others are. Analyzing the observer's own bias is important too.
Observer bias, right?
Then there's reevaluation, documentation, experimentation after observing.
Yep.
And generating formulas both deductively and inductively, and then testing those formulas for where they work and where they break down.
It sounds very involved. The text says it's like a constant 247 mental measure.
Yeah, almost a subconscious process of constantly measuring yourself and how things you sense relate to each other, trying to quantify these hidden symbiotic relationships.
So it's interpretive but also empirical. Needs observation and interaction.
Exactly. And because the researcher is seen as a key processing tool, their own mental state is considered important. That interconnectedness idea again.
Which links back to managing mechanical bias. Self-awareness helps the researcher account for their own influence.
Precisely. Knowing your own biases helps mitigate them.
Okay, how about the specifics of life mathematics data gathering? Observation comes first.
Right, and observation has subtypes. There's the susceptible law first.
Susceptible law.
It says that how an observer perceives something is determined by their latent subliminal relationship with it, their position, and time.
Okay, so gathering susceptible data means measuring those relationships between entities and between the observer and entities.
Yes, and measuring the observer's own susceptibility. Then there's disposition stimulation.
That sounds like actively poking things.
Kind of, yeah. It's empirical.
Yeah.
The investigator intentionally tries to generate expected responses in order to figure out the underlying formulas.
Okay, and attributive identifier.
This relies on the attributive identifier law, which basically says you define an unknown entity by watching its actions, reactions, and its impact on others over time.
So you measure the unknown thing, measure related things, and compare over time.
Exactly. It's about defining something by its interactions and effects.
What about other methods? Archival data and questionnaires.
Archival data can be useful for trends, but the text cautions it might contain inaccurate descriptions. Questionnaires face challenges in getting at someone's true static designation or fundamental role. Observation seems preferred.
Understandable. What about challenges in ethics? Identity ambiguity is mentioned.
Yeah, that's a big one. For the analysis to be certain, you need an accurate description of the entity. Ambiguity arises if that's hard to get.
Like if someone has multiple roles or conflicting traits.
Exactly. Or if they have multiple Z quantums that identify are combining inclination, like inherent tendency, and designation, like role or profession.
Z quantum. So you need inclination plus designation plus 6, but people can have multiple roles, right? or inclinations.
So, right, there's static Z quantum, position relative to certainty, and dynamic Z quantum, an alternating secondary role. Sometimes they might be symmetrical, like an engineer who is also a farmer.
And if someone has multiple attributes that could lead to similar outcomes?
That's identity ambiguity. When these polyattributive attributes, as the text calls them, yield commutative outcomes, basically.
Totally.
Different paths leading to the same result, making it hard to pin down the core structure.
Makes sense. What about anonymity? How is personal data handled?
The text suggests data isn't used in a plainly identifiable way. The investigator's methods might be largely unknown to others.
So findings can be verified without revealing identities.
Apparently, yes. By using encrypted data referring to particles, receptor types, inclination values, Z-quantum's co-analysts can potentially check the match without knowing the actual person involved.
Okay, interesting approach. Now let's get to the nuts and bolts. The basic measurements. It starts by saying existence is a mathematical structure.
Yes, sequenced by time. And anything that impinges on your senses is also seen as a mathematical configuration. Time is fundamental here.
Temporal dynamics again. Modulating disposition, causing change.
Exactly. And they use a verse number system to study this abstract, interconnected frame of awareness. The idea is that all entities are number personifications.
Number personifications, acting like capacitors because they're interconnected.
Yeah, due to this assumed interconnection and symbiotic relation. And because temporal dynamics create relatively consistent and dynamic patterns, you can classify actions and reactions into numeric elements.
Which allows for generating formulas.
Right. It's about finding the recurring mathematical patterns in behavior.
Okay, under contingencies, there's the seed activity law. What's that?
It basically says actions, reactions, attraction, repulsion. They all have a kind of inertia. They just sit there until time acts on them. And the impact depends on how well the catalyst, the trigger, harmonizes with the entity's position and the specific timing.
Harmony and timing are key. It also mentions life annihilation and certainty.
Yeah, it suggests that having too many simultaneous certainties can be problematic. Life annihilation. Time acts as a filter, allowing possibilities based on the harmony of different factors. Certainty itself is defined interestingly as one specific occurrence emerging from 4 random equivalent possibilities, differentiated only by complex surrounding details.
1 from 4 possibilities. Okay. Now, the Ikolalysis table, generated from digits 0, 9.
Yes, by measuring a perceptual constant in 1/4 of reclassifiable digits. 9 is noted as a neutral constant.
And combining digits changes their class, but bonding with 9 just enhances or flips positivity and negativity.
That's what it says. The table itself is derived using a formula, certainty existential constant.
And its purpose is to convert letters, words, statements into mathematical functions, using these I-quanta values.
Exactly. The text provides the table mapping letters to specific I-quanta values.
And there's a method, how to calculate the value of anything, which gives the inclination R.
Yes. You sum the I-quanta values of the letters in the word and divide by 8 with some adjustments for repeated letters.
Like the example anything, which comes out as inclination R, correct. Then there's the L-modo quantum table, derived from the I-quanta table.
Yeah, I-quanta divided by 8, or using other fractions related to 9. Its purpose is to convert those summed I-quanta values into the final inclination value from 1 to 9 for classifying entities.
And the swing law. Mood determined by subliminal relation, space, and time.
Right. Mood, again, influenced by these underlying connections and dynamics. The L-modo quantum table supposedly shows these latent relationships and the influence between different I-quanta values. It represents the entity's psyche potential influence level.
Okay. And calculating the identifier or Z-quantum, we saw this earlier.
Now we get the formula. Z-quantum is congruent to inclination plus designation plus sex.
So you calculate inclination R and designation DRS using that same letter value summing method.
Yes, like the anything example.
And the constant 6, where does that come from?
It's described as a remainder number in an Osiris statement, which seems to be a specific type of statement within the system.
Okay, so for anything, as a mathematician, designation D3, the static Z-quantum comes out around 7, defining its position relative to everything else.
That's the calculation shown, yes. It defines its position in the ambience relative to other entities.
Right. And finally, the Ikolalysis units of measurements, life potential, K-spectra, a cryptogram, existogram, existometer.
Yes, these are the specific units. Life potential measures capacity. K-spectra outlines general possibilities. Ecryptogram and existometer likely measure other abstract aspects.
And the functions for life potential and K-spectra detail what the different numbers, like 2, 5, 6, 7 for potential, or 2, 3, 4, 8 for K-spectra, signify.
Exactly. Different numbers within these scales indicate different levels or types of potential, influence, or probability, according to the Ikolalysis framework.
Wow, okay. That was definitely a deep dive. We've covered a huge amount of ground, from fundamental energy and consciousness to these intricate mathematical frameworks for measuring potential, influence, even societal dynamics.
It's incredibly comprehensive, isn't it? Ikolalysis, or life mathematics, really tries to build this complete system, this mathematical language, to describe, well, pretty much everything, the physical, the non-physical, the connections between them.
It's a lot to take in. It attempts to map out the very fabric of existence and influence using numbers and formulas. It's quite a paradigm shift from how we usually think about these things.
Absolutely. It's bridging concepts that are often kept separate. Physics, consciousness, psychology, sociology, all under one admittedly complex mathematical umbrella. Whether you find it plausible or not, it's certainly a unique perspective.
It really is. And it leaves you thinking. For you listening, maybe reflect on some of these ideas. Consider how concepts like temporal dynamics, that idea that our influence isn't static, that it changes with time and circumstance, might play out in your own life.
Or the idea of adaptation, that constant interplay and adjustment between us and our environment, both seen and unseen.
Exactly. How might those concepts resonate with what you observe in yourself, in others, in the world around you? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us.